But yes, it started immediately following the possession and gradually worsened over the months that followed. And interesting things in the house were happening simultaneously. We had a paranormal team come in from the college at that time to try to get some of the same results I got. But it was a very trying time. She and I were both having out-of-body experiences at that time. Somehow that exceptional state accompanied these entity interaction experiences. And so often she would leave her body, and at that time she said I would ascend, she would see it, and then when I was awoken, she could see me like fall into my body, like the thrust to the bed. It was something she was able to observe.
When she was out of her body?
No, just she was awake and watching me awake, and she said it was as if I fell and was thrust into my body, and I just jolted down into, and she could just see the reaction during that time. But just interesting to try to piece apart the chronology of the experience to get it's really a sort of a, I don't want to say waveform, but there was a sudden increase in activity, and that could be thought of as a crest and a trough that gradually lessened over months, but at the most intense period, my possession, then
So after the initial possession, it happened quite a few times, maybe lessened?
There was a lessening of interaction activity, but during that peak month, it was unbearable. Just the torment night after night. She would cry a lot, terrified. We'd wake each other up back and forth to listen to the sound of claws on the keyboard. I think we talked about that. And in retrospect, I understand now why they were clawing the keyboard, this belligerent sort of slamming. It wasn't like typing, but she would wake me up to listen to that, or I would wake her up to listen to just the activity at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. Phenomenal. So many stories, but it was negative. It was torment. It was sudden old hag type interactions. These old hag syndrome.
Is that what it's called?
Or night paralysis hallucination, but it's also traditionally the old hag would sit on your chest and choke you as you sleep, right? This is the old hag that paralyzes you and torments you at night. I've been able to piece apart why that is sort of a universal, I don't know if it's in every culture, but it's definitely in most, that they have some name for this interaction, or in the night to have something on your chest. But these long just nightly torment got to the point where neither of us were able to sleep. We then became very short with one another the next day, and we fought, me and my girlfriend, And she said, I'm not sleeping in the same room with you. And she said she's very angry, and that I could have the bed. She was not. She was in one room of the house, I was in the other. A few moments after laying in the bed, the room was filled with light, and a figure appeared at the entrance of the room, a female figure. It was so incredibly bright that you could see it with eyes closed or eyes open. That is, she existed within the visible spectrum. She physically existed in the room, but she also existed in ranges beyond the visible spectrum at that same time, if that makes sense. She descended into physicality and existed above it and within it at the same time. She was so immense in this radiance. Light of that intensity is so strong it can carry emotion. And she was able to comfort me with her radiance. It was an incredible warmth that filled my whole body. And I'm almost careful in retelling the story because it's such of an intense thing. I never want it to lose its meaning for me. It's a sacred experience. It was this woman of white. We've called her the woman in white since that time. She is something. She is something for which I hold great reverence. And I will regret until the day I die how I greeted her.
What did you do?
Sorry, I gotta... that when the room filled with light, my first thought was to myself, laying in bed, oh God, what now? Because every night it had been one thing after another. We're just waiting every night for them to, but it was just moments after I'd laid in bed, as if she'd been waiting for me to be alone, or I don't understand what it was that she stayed for moments, and I learned then that that immense light can exist beyond the visible, and of course, being the scientist that I am, I had to test it. I had to test the reality of her presence in the room. And so, laying in the bed and sitting up, I turned my head right to left to make sure that her image would move accordingly to her location in the room, her physical reality in the room I was in. And that was important for me, to do these tests of the visual field to make sure that my surroundings were shared with hers. And I was never going to mention it to anyone. It was so strange, crazy. But the next day, woke up, we sat on the couch and just talking. I said, you know, I saw the most incredible light last night. And I just about died. You saw her too.
Hmm?
And and I made sure, of course, to say nothing to her about my experience. Only to say, tell me more. Because I know that if once I tell my story, that's going to influence her memory, possibly. I wanted to make sure our experiences were distinct and that there was no bias to influence her in any way. She described a woman who approached her from the different doorway. From the doorway of the bathroom, appeared and approached her on the couch there. And she said the light was so phenomenally bright that it filled the entire room. And interestingly, she then had a dream. She drifted off while apparently the girl was in the room, and my girlfriend did not connect her dream with the experience, but I connected it later. It was, she dreamt of riding a horse. She was a big fan of horses. She was riding a horse with a woman, and the woman's horse was white, and the woman was in white. And they were riding through a space with others around them. And as they approached these others, she said it was as if anybody who saw her in this place immediately had reverence for her, as if she was royalty, and she was almost like bowing to royalty. She made it sound like, and that the two of them rode through, and there's more details. You know, the details over the years get fuzzy, but there was more to the dream. But I later connected that. Does that make sense that you saw a woman in white, and then in the dream you saw a woman in white? Yeah. And it seemed obvious to me, but she didn't make that connection at first. But yeah, I've since come to terms with, you know, that experience gave me something to pray to. I had not had that before. To pray directly to this woman who graced me with her presence once. And I've since learned I can induce connection with these entities of white light and bring them, like with the lion, if you recall. Mm-hmm. If I pray hard enough and adamantly enough, she will come. Often, you know, it's a whole collection of... So the lion experience followed after the then following possession. But yeah, it's learning to control the experiences is what shamanism is. That a shamanic shamanic career begins with illness, typically. And I've learned all this after the fact, And working with Dr. Krippner has helped a lot. But he told me that this is all very, almost textbook. You had an intrusive spiritual interaction, and this caused you to become sick. That this is often involves great feelings of weakness, pain, and convulsions. All those three things that I've had. And that the convulsions are fully conscious and often just shaking, quivering, shivering, that seems to accompany mediumship experience. And learning all that has been a great relief, that I'm not alone.
What was his name again?
Stanley Krippner is the head of my dissertation committee. He's the chair. He's expert in parapsychology and has recently got into shamanism more deeply. In his later years, he's 86, 87. He's the expert they have on these shamanism shows on TLC and what have you. It's cool to see him on TV when it's peak years. But yeah, he helped me as I progressed to know that this is not isolated, you're not alone, that this is something that happens everywhere in the world, cross-culturally, and it happens identically, and
Interesting.
and help me to come to terms with my lineage and what this means. To have a shamanic grandmother and so on, like we talked about. Since that time, I have been able to call them into the room at one additional time. I rented a cabin in the forest out by, this cabin was in Emeryville? No, what was the name of the... Way past the Snoqualmie out east. And just renting a week in a cabin. No, it was 3 days. It was like a weekend. Bringing all the studio gear. Bringing the snare drum. Bringing the microphones. Synthesizer. Ayahuasca. And good pot. With the intention of connecting with spirit, and also recording the peak experience as it occurs, as best I can capture it using music or whatnot. And but I was intimidated by taking ayahuasca alone in the forest.
Had you done it before?
Yes.
Is it dangerous? I mean, I imagine it's probably dangerous, isn't it?
It's dangerous in a spiritual way. Physically, you're fine. But what I've known to happen is, like we talked about, I'm diving down into the ocean when I meditate, or when I meditate deeply using ayahuasca to induce dramatically altered, dramatically non-ordinary states of consciousness. Significant and intense non-ordinary states. And to think of that as not just diving down into shallow waters, is how long can I hold my breath in meditation, but that suddenly diving down to very deep waters, depths, the underworld, that this attracts attention from the unseen, this act. And so much so that it even will begin before drinking, as if they're preparing you for what's to come. And it's quite incredible, just the fact that I was very afraid to drink that, knowing that it was potentially able to induce those types of experiences, that I began to pray again with an edge of fear. Not the same fear I had after that possession, but a fear that I was going to do this consciously, with intention, to invite this experience, instead of just having it invasively, almost that assault of the first two. And I prayed for, again, about 3-4 hours, and just as hard as I could. And
was that after taking the ayahuasca?
No, this is just, I'm afraid to drink it, and so I'm preparing. I can't go in this alone. I can't go into those waters where I've been attacked. The shark exists in the same ocean as the beautiful bioluminescent squid. They're all sort of, once you dive down in meditation and open your eyes and see that whole realm which had been hidden from you, the realm beneath surface, the surface of things and of image. Once you go beneath the surface, you see what you had not seen. You open your eyes, first diving under the water, holding your breath. And so meditation, I've learned, is largely holding your breath, or slowing your breath. These long exhales. Until you can just sit under that long exhale like it was a tree and just relax there and attain breathlessness in certain states, being able to just hold it until it's calm and placid and stretches across the horizon, if that makes sense. To hold your focus that long. And so learning to induce with that long breath a state of consciousness of either descent or ascent, the underworld or the overworld. And to ascend is to simply direct your gaze upwards on the exhale. And then you will go where your attention points you in that case. I'm directing my attention upwards, and there is a rush at some point, ascending upwards on the breath. And once I feel that, I know that I've ascended to a different state of consciousness, and that, in that long, calm state of oceanic consciousness, is when I call out in this state of consciousness, this is tense beta, frequency, the anxiety, the frantic thinking of being in our baseline state of consciousness, our waking state. We're constantly in beta. And when we close our eyes, we only then hit a bit of alpha. But closing your eyes and letting it stretch out across a horizon on a single breath, that degree of calm can be directed into a non-ordinary state of consciousness, non-ordinary state of consciousness of a distinct type. The idea of ascending, and there's a sensation to it. I can feel when I'm there, and that's where the prayer begins. As if they won't hear me if I'm down here in this sort of frantic thinking mode, very busy thoughts. They don't hear any of the chatter of our range. You have to go to them, and that's where they hear you. And when I was in the Amazon, there was a German man who described, after I was talking about that, the fact that whales communicate in an interesting way, that they will sense in the ocean a certain bandwidth of pressure. That, you descend into the ocean and pressure changes at a gradient, and there is a range of pressure which they know somehow will carry their voice. And so when they call out to each other, if they call out in a certain depth, they won't be heard. They have to go almost to a certain channel, if you think of it, a certain frequency, and when they're on that channel, their voices spread out hundreds of miles.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
They can communicate like that, I imagine.
And that he used that as an analogy for finding a certain state of consciousness, a certain frequency, where you are on a channel with these entities that are not of our range of consciousness. You have to enter or cross over to their range of consciousness to communicate with them. And it is very much like, it's channeling at that point, wouldn't it? I mean, finding the channel.
Is that kind of the definition of what channeling is?
That's how I've come to understand channeling, as sort of finding a station on a range of, say, like a radio dial, and that you need to learn, if you want to change your music, to turn the dial upwards or downwards, to higher or lower frequency, and that if you imagine a dial inside of our mind, learning to control that dial in a similar way, and that as you're drifting down into sleep, that dial naturally, you're lowering, you're going lower and lower into ranges of consciousness beneath that waking one. But they're still conscious. They are existent within consciousness. They are just not our baseline range, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Waking state being this baseline where we live our lives and experience physicality. But this idea of ascending to them, and that's where I begin to call out for help. That's where I begin to request their presence. White light, come to me. White light, enter me. If I do this long enough, they will make their presence known to me. In this case, it was something so simple just in my closed eye meditation, I saw two eyes staring back at me. They were the eyes of a woman, and they smiled at me. You can tell smiling eyes, and they were almost playful. And she gave me a glance, and it was a sideways glance, like a sort of flirted almost. And when I saw that, I knew that I was safe. That's all I needed. And I could sleep, knowing that I would then drink the following night this brew. Moments after closing my eyes, the room was filled with light, and the door swung open in this hypnagogic state. I'm now acknowledging that this is hypnagogia.
Huh. And this again was the night before you took the ayahuasca.
Yeah. This is what occurred. The door swung open to the cabin, and there were three beautiful women, young women, maybe 19 each. Beautiful white light, blue white light. And they were standing on the opposite side of the threshold of the doorway. And they were holding hands, guarding the door. And that
was that a message to you that you were safe?
This is just what I saw. I made no interpretations. I was just in complete awe. And on the opposite side of them was the most brilliant white light, and it was as if the brightest summer day where they were, and that it was shining. It shone in the doorway across my stomach in bed. It just filled the whole room, and I was in bed just looking up at them. And the one on the left, there was the three of them. And the one on the left turned on her right and looked at me in bed. And she gave me such of a, it was like a loving gaze, but it was also a little flirty. Like she was playing. She was young and so beautiful, and I'll never forget her smile. It's such a powerful image. And the next night I drank, But I knew that as I thought of the experience the next day and what to make of it, I did realize, like you said, they were holding hands, they were guarding the door, they were keeping me safe. The threshold was safe. And there's something in these other cultures about the doorway. Have a horseshoe, have a Jewish scroll. All these things, the doorway is guarded by lions. This is a universal east and west. And to see those lions when I went to China, those lions in front of an institution, in front of a bank or a college, university, that to see those in front of the banks in China was like, wow, this is something about the big cats and guarding the doorway. When they looked at me, or when she looked at me and they guarded the door, it was made clear that they were Finnish. They were Finns. And they let me know that. And what was also interesting was, as beautiful as she was, her features were cat-like.
Were Gaelic?
Cat-like.
Oh,
cat-like. Very cat-like. And these are just things that I noted, and my Uncle Leonard, we all look cat-like, Vince. There's a cat-like feature. There's the cheekbones are higher, and I've been told I look like a cat. My Uncle Leonard had Kathy Lampanainen, nice Finnish name. But I just always thought of how he was an elf in every meaning of the word. Elves come from Finland. But I understand more now why. He wore an elvish ranger's cap when he was a forest ranger. I mean, but he always wore it. He needed to be in the forest. But he was a literal ranger for the Parks Department, and like he was out there in the forest all day because it's the only way he could survive. He could not be around people. He was so sensitive. And when he would come for Thanksgiving, Uncle Leonard he could never eat in front of people. It was, he had such anxiety and such that Finnish quality of needing the forest. We identify with the forest. We need solitude. We all need that connection to the forest. But he taught me, something he looked like an elf. He wore the cap even. He had a wood shop where he made toys for me, skis and all kinds of things. And he would just live in the forest as a living. And but when he was around people, he seemed very calm, but inside his guts were just in knots. He could never eat in front of people. Mom would have to make him a plate and he would take it home because the anxiety of being around people was too much for him. Yeah, but his daughter looks like a cat. Her name is Kathy, but he always called her Katsi Lampy. Anyway, I knew that I was safe and ready to go, and the actual experience was less intense in some ways than the before drinking. Yeah. And so that's something distinct to me. I've never heard anyone else describe ayahuasca's pre-drink in that way, but there's so much backstory, I just don't know where to go. I get tired of this going on and on. It's a lot, it's heavy stuff, isn't it? What are your thoughts?
Well, it sounds like it's a really satisfying thing for you. The shamanic experiences.
Well, I don't want to go into it. It's something it feels like is almost either I get sicker or I do what I need to do.
Is the idea that the shamanic experiences would help you heal? Is that
the whole wounded healer thing, that I would eventually do what Grandma did? As a living, it seems like they want that of me, and I can say they with some context now. Does that make sense? All this backstory lets me say they, and you'll know who I mean. Mm-hmm. If I just start coming to you talking about they and them and the unseen who influence me, that's That's a diagnosis right off the bat. But to say, I hear voices, would you like to hear them too, is a very different question. Would you like to hear them? I mean, I can bring in the recordings if it's something you're curious about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In the studio during that intense first month after the possession, the equipment itself began to pick up what we were hearing every night. And yes, she would shake me awake and say, do you hear all these voices? And, you know, the TV downstairs we thought was on, and it wasn't on. It was just, the house was packed. And my studio gear began to pick up voices. And sometimes I'd have the equipment rolling when I caught them, but a lot of times I didn't. It was just sudden booming over the speakers, or but I'd be working on a track, a drum track in this case, and you know, EQ and compression on this sound, and on playback would be a completely different sound than the drums. And it was just incredible. The recording, my most clear recording, is of a man in anguish crying out, "Please help me," in exactly that tone. And his anguish, he's afraid, he's crying out desperately. And it's unnerving to hear. And when I was playing back these drums and I heard that, I was just struck, frozen in my chair. What is he want me to help? What is this? And I play it back again and again. I brought, and then later in that same recording is two women in conversation with one another, and my name is heard. Very interesting. I showed them to everyone I knew, and then, then I brought it to the professor of audio technology at Michigan State University, and I just, with no context or background, just played him the recording and said, "What do you hear?" And he said, "Well, I hear a man speaking in English." And he was able to make out the phrasing. And then I told him I was alone in the room when that was recorded, and he was backtracking. Well, maybe a hard drive malfunction. Yeah, I got you. You told me what it was. I made sure to have him tell me first. I don't want to bias his perception. But then I showed it to my shamanism professor, Dr. Robert McKinley, and I thought he would blow his shit. Just, you've recorded voices of the dead. You've recorded spirits. But he wasn't impressed at all. He was real matter of fact about it. Like, oh, they always say that. Don't listen to them. What? That is the most common thing for spirits to ask, is for help. They have some unfinished business. They need you to convey some message or whatever else. Yeah, they're always asking for help. He was an incredible guy too. And so I brought him all of my experiences that were happening upstate when I went back to Michigan State, and I told him everything, and he wept. And he said, "These things tend to follow a traumatic experience." It's the first thing he said, not knowing about the traumatic rape that had occurred to my girlfriend the night before her possession. That's a whole, that's part of the story. That was the trauma but he knew about the trauma without me even saying anything about it. He said, these follow a trauma, there's a sudden surge of activity, and then it dampens down gradually over time. And I did an independent study with him, meeting with him every, few days. And our independent study was on incubus attack and the out-of-body experience. I needed to focus on those things and try to understand what was happening. And he was able to give me these incredible, some literature. Shaman and the Demon was the name of one of the articles, and how those things are related. I've since learned quite a bit about that topic. But I'd meet with him every few days, and I was getting activity even in Lansing. These incredible things were happening. We can get into some stories, but we were doing the out-of-body experience, talking about the out-of-body experience every other day, and he had never had one, he acknowledged that this is something the shaman does. And we're talking about it, and he said we finished our talk, and he said he went home and was reading a book, sitting in his chair, and he fell asleep with the book on his chest. He then stood up and looked down and saw himself laying with a book on his chest. And then a autoscopy, and saw himself. Then he said there were vines, and he went up to the rooms above where his room was. And so he ascended through levels, rooms, and came to a higher place where there was a entity waiting for him. And he said this spirit was male, and he said, I've never met him in my life, but he felt very familiar at the same time. And he said the entity told him, you must guide the boy you see often. And he didn't say it, and I didn't say it, but he gave me like a little twinkle in his eye, like, well, that would be you. Yeah. But that was his first out-of-body experience.
And that was after meeting with you.
Yeah, that day he went home and had the book experience. So it's interesting to me how these very powerful experiences influence others in my network, and how to rationalize what that is. For instance, the night of the possession, the following day I got a phone call from a friend of my dad's. He was someone I had worked. His name was Ron Stokes, and my dad had him do painting and stuff on the houses. And I was, my dad kind of hired me to work under him and to do siding, and he'd never called me before. So this is the first time, but I had spent a lot of time with him in close proximity working on these houses. And he called, and you could tell he was nervous in his voice, or he was upset. It was in the morning. And he said, is everything okay? And it wasn't. I'd just been possessed. But I was shook up, but he called me shook up. And said, is everything okay? And I lied and said, oh yeah, everything's fine, I'm good. But he I think he had had maybe a bad dream or something. He knew that something had happened and was calling me. And my best friend from that time, from those early years, Don Langston, later told me at that time he had also had a very terrifying nightmare of me being attacked by a demon. And that it really shook him up the whole following day. He didn't contact me, but maybe Ron Stokes had a similar dream. But just how if it's a powerful enough experience, it almost seems to have weight to it. Like it has mass, it makes waves. And people around you, people who are in close proximity to you emotionally, feel that. And I do use that term, proximity of emotion. Those very close to, will feel almost like a subconscious web where vibrations will be felt by all those close to you on those heartstrings. Anyway.
Interesting stuff.
Does it seem like I'm rational about it? That I've made sense of it? Or does it make sense to you?
I don't know if I can even apply those terms to something that I've never experienced.
It becomes a point of belief?
It's the kind of thing, well, from my perspective, and I'm sure you can understand this as a therapist, I never want to question another person's reality.
The reality of it. There are people who have no sense of reality, and you do reality testing with those people. Their reality is not valid. It's not, right?
Well, from the standpoint of seeing things that aren't there, or hearing things that maybe aren't actually occurring, you can say that.
But these things are verifiable. What's wild is, oh my goodness, oh, it's time.
Kaleb, what?
Everyone that's been in that room of the angelic encounter has mentioned the lights that they see there at night. And that's without knowing each other. And it's 5 people at this point.
What is your hope in coming to therapy? Surely you don't need me to verify what you believe to be true.
I'd like to get some feedback on I like having some perspective on these experiences and how to integrate them into my life. I feel like if I don't integrate them, I will get sick and die. And that's something I can feel with this pain and weakness that is inhibiting me in ways that are very hard to describe. But it's a deep, deep weakness and a pain that doesn't stop. And I don't know how to function unless I try to integrate a spiritual lifestyle which acknowledges the possession and what has happened since it. because if I don't get to the bottom of this, it's going to get worse. And Dr. Krippner said, you might die. It's quite possible this will take you. That in those cultures, people go insane and then they die. That's, tribal culture. They go crazy, then they die. Yeah. And I don't want that to happen, do I? So that's what my hopes are for therapy is to not die, to get to the bottom of this.
Is there a bottom to be gotten to?
Well, get to the bottom of the illness anyway.
Going on for centuries, huh? I'm not quite sure I understand what getting to the bottom of it is at this point.
Yeah, well, as I attempt, I'd like to have continued perspective and support on what's going to occur.
I'm happy to be supportive. I certainly
I'm going to capsulize ayahuasca so I can microdose it over days. This is getting to the bottom of it as best I can tell. It's a shamanic medicine used by initiates in the jungle. They isolate and they take ayahuasca. I don't know if it's wise. I'm afraid of going back into that realm, diving back down into that water, but I'm getting ready to.
How does one get ayahuasca?
I lived in the Amazon for 5 months and 4 months. And I've met many practitioners there. And people that will send it to me from the Amazon. The Amazon stories are a whole other thing, but they have taught me a lot.
That, it concerns me. I don't know anything about ayahuasca, but obviously it's a pretty potent drug. I don't know what the safe dosage levels are, what the side effects are, or any of that. I would be very hesitant to.
I don't call it a drug since the active ingredient is a sensory neurotransmitter. It's an endogenous substance. There's no other drug that's like that. It's something endogenous to the body.
But so are opiates.
No.
Aren't they?
No, we don't. We have
natural
endorphins, endomorphines. It's not morphine, it's endomorphine.
So it's different.
Yeah, it's but the whole lock and key mechanisms of the neurons. Opiates fit into that. What is it? The agonist. But this is actually the neurotransmitter itself, dimethyltryptamine. It's created by the body.
Dimethyltryptamine.
Yeah, DMT. But DMT is in higher percentages in the blood of schizophrenics. Interesting. Created, they felt by the pineal gland, the pineal, the or also created by the lungs. Interesting. But also in these plants, it's released naturally when we're born and when we die, according to Strassman, and also during childbirth. And so it governs the transition into and out of life, literally. So when you chug a bunch of it in the middle of life, it makes sense. The shaman calls it the mini death. It's just a tiny little death. Real quick death, you die and come back really quick. Just mini death. Anyway, I was very skeptical going into the Amazon about the reality of that. When I left, I was no longer skeptical. It was definitely.
Well, I'm sure they've been using it there for maybe as long as thousands of years. I imagine that there's reasons behind that.
Yeah. Are we up? Or is it?
Well,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little past.
Yeah.
But any thoughts or any?
Well, right now, my thoughts are mainly just some concern for your health. I don't know anything about DMT beyond what you've just told me. Certainly I've heard of ayahuasca, and I know that people have some pretty amazing experiences on it. But the thought that you'd be using it regularly scares me.
Yeah, microdosing is big in the research community right now, but microdosing typically psilocybin, LSD. This is where the clinicians are going, into microdosing territory.
So that's taking very small doses and observing the kind of psychoactive changes that occur.
Yeah, this my professor Jim Fadiman calls them subperceptual doses, using LSD almost like you would coffee in the morning.
Interesting.
And
it is fascinating. It sounds like the sorts of things you should do under the supervision of somebody with medical knowledge.
yeah, I mean, the transpersonal psychologists are the ones leading this field of clinical use of psychedelics.
Why did you go into that? It sounds like you're fascinated by it.
My dissertation is on microdosing ayahuasca.
Is this like research, or have you already finished?
No, it's I'm still working on the proposal. It's going to be quite a project, but the funding looks like it's going to come through from MAPS. There's so many.
Anyway, I guess that's not the kind of feedback you wanted, but that's where I'm at the moment.
Yeah. Well, no, I know. I dumped a lot on you, both these sessions. Maybe it's a lot to integrate as a therapist.
It is. It's a lot to take in.
Okay. Well, I just was hoping to get some, I don't know, parting words or anything.
I'm sorry I don't have any words of deep wisdom for you. It's certainly interesting talking to you.